Hello everyone, welcome to our latest Queen Elizabeth Scholarship presentation brought to you from the McMaster Health Forum at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. An agenda for today's presentation, I will tell you a little bit about the McMaster Health Forum, a little bit about the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program, and then I'll turn it over to our presenter today, who is Anson, an undergraduate student who went to the United Kingdom. He's going to tell you about the projects that he worked on while he was abroad. So the McMaster Health Forum is a leading hub for improving health outcomes through collective problem solving. We harness information, convene stakeholders, and prepare action-oriented leaders, and act as an agent of change by empowering stakeholders. The Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program is run by a partnership between the Rita Hall Foundation, Community Foundations of Canada, Universities Canada, and Canadian universities. The purpose is to activate a dynamic community of young global leaders across the Commonwealth to create lasting impacts both at home and abroad through cross-cultural exchanges encompassing international education, discovery and inquiry, and professional experiences. The version of the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program that's offered by the McMaster Health Forum is called Strengthening Health Systems. Our scholars contribute to strengthening health systems and become part of our large and growing network of health system leaders. We've had 2 cohorts of scholars so far. On the screen now is the list of students who were in our first cohort. They primarily went away or visited us in the calendar year of 2016. And on the screen now is our second cohort of scholars. They primarily went away or visited us in the calendar year of 2017. Anson, our presenter, comes from this cohort. And speaking of Anson, here he is. Anson is in the Global Health specialization of the Bachelor of Health Sciences undergraduate program here at McMaster. He developed an interest in the interplay between academia, government, and non-government organizations during international responses to humanitarian crises. During his internship, Anson sought to understand how mental health interventions may be tailored to meet the unique demands of individual health systems and the processes by which government and international organizations develop policy recommendations for conflict-affected regions. So nobody came here to listen to me, they came to listen to Anson. So Anson, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, James, and welcome to everyone attending here at the forum and online. My name is Anson, and I'll be speaking about the work that I completed during my QES internship this summer. So the title of this presentation is Examining Mental Health Care for Conflict-Affected Populations in Low and Middle Income Countries, or LMICs, and this was really the common theme for the work that I did. So here's an overview of what we'll be going over today. I'll be starting with a bit of background on England and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Next, I'll provide some context for the projects that I worked on, and these were a cross-sectional survey of IDPs in Ukraine, literature review of mental health interventions in low and middle income countries, and rapid appraisals of health systems in Europe and the Middle East. Finally, we'll finish with some of my key takeaways from the internship and leave some time for some questions from you guys at the end. So my internship was in England, which is one of 4 countries within the UK, in addition to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And so let me just quickly orient you to this map here. If you look at the body of land on the left, you can see a kind of dark bolded line, and above that is Northern Ireland, and below that is the Republic of Ireland, and they're separate nations. If you look at the larger body on the right, you can see Scotland in the north, England highlighted in red to the south, and Wales to the west, just underneath the word Liverpool. The UK is located to the northwest of continental Europe. In fact, if you look at the bottom right corner of the map, you can see a bit of France there. And as a whole, it's around a quarter of the size of Ontario. So you can drive from London to Edinburgh in the same amount of time as it would take for you to drive from Hamilton to Timmins. And the City of London, where I interned, is the UK's capital and largest city, and it's located in the southeast, as you can see. So my placement was hosted by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, or LSHTM, and the school was first founded by Sir Patrick Manson at the end of the 19th century. Today, it mainly operates in the public health and global health sectors, and most recently, the school was recognized for its response to the Ebola epidemic of West Africa, where it played a large role in addressing health and social challenges through its work in epidemiology and education programs for health providers. On the right, you can see a picture of the Tavistock Place campus, where I was this summer. and which hosts the Faculty of Public Health and Policy. There are two other faculties at LSHTM, and they're located at Keppel Street, which is around 10 minutes away. I particularly interned at the European Center on the Health of Societies in Transition, or EcoHost, which focuses on health services during critical periods of social change, and was first established after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they were looking at the health consequences of that collapse. EcoHost's work mainly focuses on responses to humanitarian crises, so much like James mentioned in the introduction. And humanitarian crises encompass armed conflicts, such as those in Yemen, in Syria, and the DRC, natural disasters like floods, hurricanes, cyclones, and also other emergencies. And EcoHost's work mainly focuses on low and middle income countries. So since this is an area that interests me, I decided to reach out to them when considering where to go this summer. So what we know is that health systems of LMICs are often strained in the aftermath of crises. And this means that there can be suboptimal availability of healthcare services, and with limited resources, physical health services are often prioritized over mental health services, which means that many of those who need mental health support cannot access it or decide not to. Given this situation, there's a need for evidence-informed mental health interventions that are accessible and affordable and can also be tailored to local health systems in LMICs. So this serves as the basis for my internship, and I'll be now speaking a bit more about the 3 projects that I worked on. A project that I completed this summer was the analysis of a cross-sectional survey of internally displaced persons, also known as IDPs, in Ukraine. And our primary objective was to determine the burden of somatic distress, which is a condition where physical symptoms arise without a known medical cause, and also the prevalence of other mental disorders. Let's start with a bit of context again. So beginning in 2014 and continuing through 2016, there was an armed conflict between the Ukrainian military and pro-Russian separatist factions. And as you can see from this map on the right, Ukraine shares its eastern border with Russia. And so the conflict began along this border and continued west as the separatists gained territory, which is shown in blue there on the map. And because of this, around 1.8 million Ukrainians were internally displaced, forced from their homes, and many of them were settled in other areas around the country. Due to the trauma associated with war and internal displacement, it was suspected that many of them would have mental disorders, so common ones such as anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and other disorders such as somatic distress. To determine the overall burden of mental disorders and relationships with mental health care utilization, EcoHost conducted a cross-sectional survey of around 2,200 IDPs, and the survey sought to represent the national distribution of IDPs and sampled participants across all 25 Ukrainian oblasts, which are basically the equivalent of provinces. Some of the most important findings were that over half of participants, around 55%, were at risk of somatic distress, which is very, very high. And this meant that they were likely to be feeling unexplained physical symptoms like pain or insomnia. And we also noted that the prevalence of common mental disorders such as anxiety, depression, and PTSD were high. So I think the numbers for that were 17% for anxiety, 22% for depression, and 26% for PTSD. And we also did a linear regression analysis that showed a strong association between being at risk of somatic distress and being functionally disabled, meaning experiencing decreased functioning throughout the day for a consistent period of time. We also found that there is a low use of mental health services across the population. And if you look at the flowchart on the right, you see that around 1,400 participants self-reported a mental health concern in the past year, and of those, 915 were at risk of somatic distress. Of those 915 individuals, only 22% sought care. So given the severity of this condition and also the large burden, this was a very, very low number, and that stood out to us. So what are some of the implications of these findings for the Ukrainian health system? Well, just to reiterate, our results highlighted a substantial burden of mental disorders in post-conflict Ukraine, specifically for the outcome of somatic distress. And despite this burden and the fact that healthcare is technically free, even though citizens end up usually paying for services or even products, IDPs were unlikely to seek out healthcare due to economic, geographic, or knowledge barriers. There was also the sentiment, and this emerged from our survey as well, that such mental health concerns would be poorly understood by healthcare providers locally. So now to frame this as Ukraine's agenda, as Ukraine is looking to rebuild and offer better healthcare services to its citizens, what should policymakers do? Well, we suggested that they should strengthen diagnosis, improve provider education, and also support services at the primary care level. They should also pay particular attention to higher risk demographics that emerged from our analysis, and these include individuals who are female, of lower SES or socioeconomic status, are older, have experienced multiple traumatic events, and have other concomitant mental health disorders such as depression or PTSD. To ensure that vulnerable populations are protected, we need to ensure that health system actors engage in evidence-informed health system planning and capacity building to develop accessible regional programs in Ukraine. The next project that I worked on was a systematic review of mental health interventions in low and middle income countries. So this was actually a follow-up to a 2015 piece of work that consisted of 15 different systematic reviews on a variety of topics. So quite a large publication. You can see the title page on the right. And yeah, basically it was an evidence review. So the purpose was really to determine where the international community was focusing its efforts on research in humanitarian crises. And they, back in 2015, included all random and non-random studies, including economic evaluations, on those 15 topics. So the search was conducted between January 1980 and April 2013, so over 30 plus years, across a variety of peer-reviewed article databases, and also accessing multiple gray literature sources. And one of those 15 systematic reviews focused on mental health and psychosocial support, which you can see on the right in Annex 8. So they accessed 5 different published databases, being Embase, Global Health, Medline, PsycInfo, and PsycExtra, and also a variety of gray literature sources. And you can also see the search terms they used in the graphic as well. So given the rise in the number of humanitarian crises in recent years, we were interested in updating the search to see if there would be any patterns or an uprise that we would be able to notice. So in July of this year, I did exactly that. I updated the review by performing a follow-up search with article dates from, wrong order for the slides, but here we go. With article dates from May 2013 to June 2017, using a revised search strategy. And we examined the same types of studies within the same settings, and this yielded 24 studies that met the inclusion criteria, with the majority of identified studies conducted in the aftermath of armed conflict. Also in urban or mixed urban-rural settings. So this was slightly different from the 2015 review, where the majority of the studies were in mixed urban-rural settings only. And once again, Once again, the most common outcomes were depression and PTSD. And CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and group-based interventions were the main treatment types So this finding was interesting to us as it reflected a growing international interest in this type of research, particularly useful for agenda setting and policy development conducted in LMICs. We also found that the quality of reporting appeared to be rising, and this has positive implications for applying findings to the development and implementation of policies. So the third and final project that I participated in involved piloting rapid appraisals of health systems in Europe and the Middle East. This work is part of a larger collaboration known as Strengths, which intends to help with the implementation and scaling up of mental health interventions for Syrian refugees. So here's a little bit of background on the Syrian refugee crisis to provide some context. So since the civil war began in the area in 2011, we've had around 5 million Syrians who've left their homes to resettle elsewhere, most commonly in Turkey, in Lebanon, and in Jordan. Because of the stress and trauma that they've experienced, they're at a high risk of developing common mental disorders such as anxiety, depression, and PTSD. But despite this, they often face significant barriers, whether it's economic, geographic, or even language barriers, to accessing mental health care. So there's a need for accessible and effective care that can be widely delivered by lay health workers and not by specialists. And given these requirements, the Strengths Project has looked to the Problem Management Plus, or PM Plus intervention, which is an evidence-based intervention supported by the WHO for the treatment of anxiety, depression, and stress in populations affected by adversity. Here's a bit more about PM Plus. It's WHO supported, and it's meant to be delivered by non-specialist health workers over 5 weekly sessions lasting around 90 minutes. And it's particularly useful because it can be adapted to address many different mental health concerns, and it does not require specialist care. The intervention is evidence-based, it's culturally sensitive, and it's also locally adaptable, which makes it useful across a variety of settings, especially for refugees resettling in different countries. And the purpose of the intervention is to assist in the management of anxiety and stress, to raise patient activity levels, and also to promote social support networks. So to aid in the implementation and scaling up of PM+, LSHTM is using what's called the rapid appraisal methodology to examine the responsiveness of 8 different health systems, and you can see them there, to current and predicted mental health needs of Syrian refugees. So rapid appraisal has been widely used before to assess health system responsiveness in low and middle income country settings, but has still to be adapted for work in mental health and psychosocial support, which is what we spent much of the summer doing by piloting it. And we've decided finally upon a mixed methods approach consisting of desk-based work and also field interviews with key stakeholders. The desk-based work involves systematic searching of the literature, so that's the peer-reviewed literature and also the gray literature, and also identifying indicators of health system functioning, such as important inputs and outputs from international organizations and from local health systems. The interviews then seek the qualitative perspectives of key stakeholders, such as refugees, healthcare workers, and policymakers. So in a nutshell, that's the aim of rapid appraisal, and we're still actually continuing this work right now. So I'd like to conclude there, but I'll kind of give a quick summary of my key takeaways from this presentation. So just to recap, there's a large burden of mental disorders and subsequent functional disability among conflict-affected populations in low and middle income countries, particularly during humanitarian crises. And there is a growing international body of research in these settings, but most of it focuses on depression and PTSD. And as we saw from our study in Ukraine, many other mental health conditions also require attention but aren't receiving it. Furthermore, there's still significant barriers to mental health care access in these settings, and resource constraints often mean that mental health services are neglected. And so to ensure that these mental health care needs are appropriately met, we must ensure that local health systems are strengthened in critical sectors, and also found ways for lay health workers to deliver interventions where they're needed. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. This is just a quick photo of me looking across the English Channel. It was kind of a foggy day, but normally you can see France on the other side. And actually Abby, who's another Kiwi scholar, took this photo because we took a weekend trip out to Dover. And yeah, thanks so much. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Anson. Excellent presentation, very interesting. So we'll open things up for questions now. For anyone who's in the room with us, please put your hand up and I'll get to you. If you're online, please type your question into the chat box. While you're thinking about your potential questions, I'll ask the first one. So Anson, you spend a lot of time looking at different health systems through the work that you did while you were abroad. How has that informed your perspective on the Canadian system and what we can learn from your experiences in terms of what you found from other systems from around the world?
All right, so I guess I'll just start. So this focuses mainly on the rapid appraisal work that we did, and that really involves, as I mentioned in the presentation, looking at a variety of published articles and great literature, and also looking at indicators of the effectiveness and the inputs and outputs that those systems were receiving and outputting. So just to bring it back to your question, which was comparing those health systems and the Canadian health system, I'd really say that there were big differences between those the eight health systems that we studied, between those. But the biggest issue that they faced in delivering interventions was that they had to consider the cultural aspects of the refugees who are accessing the care, and that's something that I think we do quite well here in Canada. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's great. The Canadian system, you looked at people who have been displaced, people who had gone through terrible events in their lives, and how the systems reacted to it. Do you have a sense of how Canada could react in some similar circumstances should they happen to occur here in Canada?
So I think as it stands, we do not host too many Syrian refugees just based on the distance. But should such problems arise, I'd say the first step we might take is to strengthen the primary care support that they receive. So ensuring that the first point of contact is well made and is also culturally sensitive, and that perhaps Arabic speaking translators are available to help with that process. So once the refugees enter the system, then hopefully that will allow them to receive.
Again, I'll put another call for questions. Anybody online, please use the chat box. Let's go to more of the fun side of things. So you spent 3 months in England. Just curious, what opportunities you had while you were there. What did you see? How did you enjoy the culture? And what kinds of things did you take in while you were there that you look back fondly upon now that you're home?
So I guess there was a lot to do. So during the week, I tend to stay kind of a full work day, but during the weekend, there's lots of time to kind of see the sights and sounds. So one of the photos, as you saw, was at the Cliffs of Dover, which is one of the closest points to the French mainland. So I went there one weekend with Abby, who interned in Oxford this summer. And in terms of other, I guess, cultural events that I took part in, I was fortunate to go to Wimbledon, which is one of the 4 major tennis tournaments. So woke up at around 3:30 for that, which wasn't too great, but it was well worth it. And it was a great day of tennis and a great day of fun as well. In terms of maybe more academic experiences that I had while at LSHTM, I'd say we had a lot of talks from kind of leading policymakers and also academics from around the world, so that was really great. We actually had the opportunity to attend a talk between Peter Piot, who is the director of LSHTM, and also Dr. Tedros, who is the incoming or the newly appointed WHO Director General. So that was also a very informative and entertaining day. And yeah, I think there were quite a lot of things beyond that as well, but those were kind of my highlights. Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you very much. I always encourage our scholars to do more than just their internship while they're abroad and take advantage of it, so I'm glad to hear that you took full advantage of being there. So Wimbledon would have been fantastic. I'm quite jealous about that. So I don't see any activity online, and no one in the room is making eye contact with me anymore, so I'm going to assume that nobody has any questions. So I guess we'll draw things to a close. One last slide just to show everyone that first link there is a link to the information about our Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program here at the Forum. So if you have any interest in our program, please visit that link for more information. The second link is a link to all of our webinars. So all of our scholars do a webinar when they return. The full list is there, past webinars and future webinars. So we have one more after this one for the 2017 year, but we'll have more in 2018, so please refer back to that for a full list. And the third link is to our Forum Scholars blog page. So all of our scholars write a blog about their experiences. They get posted periodically throughout the year, so please visit that page and read their blogs and get a little bit more insight into their experiences. I want to thank Anson for his wonderful presentation today, and I want to thank those of you who joined us here live and those who are watching later on YouTube, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.